a dusty road in the heart of Asia, the most powerful king on earth lay dying in the back of an ox cart, abandoned by everyone he ruled. He had commanded the largest empire the world had ever seen, 100 nations from the Nile to the gates of India. Yet now a single common soldier of his enemy found him alone, betrayed by his own men with a sword wound in his side. Once this man had sat on the golden throne of the King of Kings, and the whole earth had bowed before him. Now he was a hunted fugitive in his own land, chained by traitors and left to die in the dust. This is the story of the losing side. His name was Darius the Third, and he was the last great king of the mighty Persian Empire. He did not begin life close to the throne, but in a distant branch of the royal house, a courtier and a soldier. He had once been a hero, famed for killing an enemy champion in single combat before the whole army. When the royal line collapsed in murder and poison, the nobles raised this brave outsider to the throne. He inherited the greatest empire the world had ever known, stretching across 3 continents, from Egypt and the Aegean coast to the mountains of Afghanistan. Every land paid him tribute. Its armies could be counted in the hundreds of thousands, its treasuries piled high with gold. No power on earth seemed able to threaten the throne of the King of Kings. But far away in the west, in a small, rough kingdom called Macedon, a young king was rising. His name was Alexander, and he was about to march east to bring the great empire down. Alexander crossed into Asia with a small but ferocious army, hardened by years of war. He came not to raid, but to conquer the entire Persian world for himself. At first, Darius did not even take the field. The invaders seemed too small to fear. He left the defense of the coast to his local governors and his Greek mercenaries. At a river called the Granicus, those governors met Alexander and were crushed. The western provinces began to fall, city after city opening their gates to the young king. Only now did the great king understand that this was no mere border raid. Darius gathered the royal army himself and marched to destroy the upstart in person. The 2 kings met at last on a narrow coastal plain at a place called Issus. Here, the vast Persian numbers were squeezed between the mountains and the sea and could not spread. Alexander hurled his cavalry straight at the center, driving for the great king himself. As the Macedonians smashed through, the battle line around Darius began to break. Seeing death come close, the King of Kings turned his chariot and fled the field. He abandoned his army, and worse, he abandoned his own mother, wife, and children to the enemy. Alexander took the royal family captive, but treated them with honor, as kings should be treated. Darius rode through the night, leaving a broken army and his family behind in the dust. The great king had met the invader in person, and the great king had run. From the safety of the east, Darius tried to buy back what his sword could not hold. He sent letters offering Alexander gold, his daughter in marriage, and half the entire empire. Half the Persian world, from the sea to the great river, laid on the table for peace. One of Alexander's oldest generals said that he would accept the offer, were he Alexander. And Alexander answered coldly, "So would I, were I that general." He would take not half the empire, but all of it, and the king's throne with it. If you enjoy these stories of mighty men brought low, take 1 second to subscribe. Now, back to the fall of Darius. Darius now staked everything on one last enormous battle for the heart of his empire. On a wide, flat plain near Gaugamela, he gathered the full might of the East. He summoned soldiers from every corner of the empire, a host vast beyond counting. He had war elephants and scythed chariots with blades spinning from their wheels. He even had the ground itself leveled smooth, so his chariots could run down the enemy. Against this ocean of men, Alexander brought a single disciplined army, badly outnumbered. On the night before the battle, terrified officers begged Alexander to attack in the dark. He refused, saying he would not steal a victory like a thief. Across the plain, the countless Persian fires burned, while the Macedonians slept. At dawn, the greatest battle of the ancient world began. The scythed chariots charged first, and the Macedonians opened lanes and let them pass harmlessly through. On the wings, the cavalry clashed in a storm of dust and screaming horses. Alexander waited, watching, until a single gap opened in the vast Persian line. Then he drove his companions like a spear straight at the heart, straight at Darius. Once more the great king saw the enemy cutting toward his chariot through the chaos. And once more, at the decisive moment, the courage of the King of Kings failed him. Darius turned and fled the battlefield, and his great army saw their king run. When the soldiers saw the royal chariot flee, the whole host dissolved into rout. With that flight, the largest empire on earth was effectively lost in an afternoon. The royal cities of Babylon and Susa threw open their gates to the conqueror. The treasure of generations, gathered over 2 centuries, fell into Macedonian hands. At Persepolis, the ceremonial heart of Persia, the great palace went up in flames. Darius fled east into the mountains, a king now ruling only the road beneath his wheels. He tried to raise one more army from the far provinces, but few would answer a king who always ran. Around him gathered not loyal subjects, but ambitious nobles with their own designs. Chief among them was Bessus, a satrap of the eastern lands and a kinsman of the king. These men no longer saw a great king. They saw a broken man worth more dead than alive. As Alexander closed in, the conspirators decided their king had become a burden. Bessus and his fellow traitors seized Darius and threw him in chains. They bound the King of Kings in golden fetters and dragged him along in a common cart. They hoped to trade him to Alexander, or to flee east and rule in his place. Alexander, learning of it, drove his men in a furious chase across the burning plains. For days and nights the Macedonians rode almost without rest to catch the fleeing column. As Alexander's riders finally appeared, the panicked traitors made their choice. Rather than give up their prisoner alive, they ran him through and left him to die. Then Bessus and the murderers scattered into the wilderness, abandoning their dying king. A single thirsty Macedonian soldier, searching for water, found the abandoned cart. Inside lay the great king of Persia, alone, pierced and dying among the baggage. The most powerful man on earth breathed his last beside a stranger, far from any throne. When Alexander reached the spot, he found his great enemy already dead. The conqueror looked down at the fallen king he had chased across the world. He took off his own cloak and laid it over the body of the King of Kings. Then he sent Darius home to be buried with honor in the royal tombs of his fathers. Alexander hunted the traitor Bessus to the ends of the earth and put him to a brutal death, for he would not let it be said that a great king could be murdered by his own servants unavenged. Darius had ruled more land and more people than almost any king before him. Yet he is remembered not for his vast empire, but for the day he ran and lost it all. Twice he faced the invader in person, and twice his nerve broke at the decisive hour. An empire of 200 years vanished because one man, at the crucial moment, chose to flee. This has been the story of the losing side.